I slumped onto the couch, utterly drained from the day's events. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, struggling to process Larry's bombshell revelation. As I stared blankly at the wall, his words echoed in my head like a broken record. I got Kara pregnant. We need to talk about a divorce, June. Those 9 words shattered the life I had known, sending shockwaves through my very core. Kara, my supposed best friend since childhood, had betrayed me in the most unimaginable way, by having an affair with my husband Larry. And now she carried his child, a living embodiment of their deceit. I couldn't help but let out a bitter chuckle as I remembered the envelope I had been safeguarding for years, the divorce papers I had prepared just in case. Little did I know that the day would come when I'd have to pull them out, not for my own protection, but because of Larry's unfaithfulness. Reaching into the drawer, I retrieved the envelope and slid out the crisp documents. With a deep breath, I handed them to Larry, whose expression was a mixture of shock and guilt. "Here you go, Larry," I said, my voice surprising me with its steadiness. "The divorce papers I've had ready for this very day." Larry's mouth hung open, rendered speechless by my preparedness. I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of satisfaction in catching him off guard. "June, he began, but I held up my hand, silencing him. "Save it, Larry. You made your choice, and now you have to live with the consequences. I won't be made a fool of anymore." I stood up, suddenly feeling a surge of strength and determination. This was the moment I had been bracing myself for. The moment when I would reclaim my life and leave behind the betrayal and lies. "Pack your things and get out," I said, my voice firm and unwavering. "I don't want to see your face again." Larry's eyes widened, but he knew better than to argue. He had played his hand, and now it was my turn to take control. As he gathered his belongings, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief that the charade was finally over, and I could begin the process of healing and moving on. The door slammed shut behind him, and I was left alone in the silence. But for the first time in a long while, the silence felt liberating, not oppressive. I had taken the first step towards reclaiming my life, and nothing would stand in my way. In the days following Larry's departure, a heavy silence settled over our suburban Denver home. The once familiar surroundings now felt foreign, reminders of the life I had known slowly crumbling around me. As I navigated this new reality, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. Larry's behavior in the weeks leading up to his confession had been odd, to say the least. He was constantly glued to his phone, typing away furiously at all hours of the day and night. Whenever I questioned him about it, he dismissed my concerns with a wave of his hand and a mumbled excuse about work. But I knew better. I had seen that kind of behavior before, back when my ex-boyfriend Alex had cheated on me during our college years. The secrecy, the lies, the constant need to be on his phone, it was all too familiar, and it had left me with a deep-seated mistrust that never truly went away. As I sat alone in our living room, surrounded by the remnants of our once happy life, I couldn't help but flash back to those painful memories. The hurt, the betrayal, the overwhelming sense of not being enough. It all came rushing back, like a tidal wave crashing over me. And yet, even in the midst of my despair, a tiny flicker of anger began to burn within me. How could Larry, the man I had trusted with my heart and my life, do this to me? How could he so callously disregard the vows we had made, the promises we had exchanged? The more I thought about it, the more the anger grew, fueled by the realization that Kara, my supposed best friend, had been in on the whole charade. The two of them sneaking around behind my back, lying to my face. It was a betrayal so deep, so profound, that it shook me to my very core. I found myself replaying every interaction, every conversation, searching for clues that I had missed. Had Kara's overly friendly behavior towards Larry been a sign? Had her constant presence in our lives been a ploy to get closer to him? The questions swirled in my mind, each one more painful than the last. But amidst the hurt and the anger, a newfound resolve began to take shape. I would not be a victim in this twisted web of deceit. I would not allow myself to be cast aside like a piece of trash, discarded and forgotten. No, I would rise above it all, and I would make them pay for what they had done to me. Larry and Kara may have thought they had won, but they had no idea what was coming their way. This was just the beginning, and I was ready to fight, for my dignity, for my self-respect, and for the life I deserved. Just when I thought the betrayal couldn't sting anymore, life decided to twist the knife even deeper. Kara, the so-called friend who had slept with my husband and gotten herself pregnant, was moving back to town. The universe really did have a sick sense of humor. At first, I tried to convince myself that it was just a coincidence. Surely, Kara wouldn't be brazen enough to rub her conquest in my face by settling down in the same town where she had destroyed my marriage. But as the weeks passed and her presence became more and more apparent, the truth became impossible to ignore. She was everywhere, at the grocery store, the coffee shop, even the park where I used to take leisurely strolls. Each time I saw her, a sickening feeling would rise in the pit of my stomach, a combination of rage and betrayal so potent that it threatened to consume me. And then there was Larry. My soon-to-be ex-husband, who had once sworn to love and cherish me, now seemed to gravitate towards Kara like a moth to a flame. Whenever I saw them together, a twisted sense of camaraderie radiating between them, it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. "June, you're being ridiculous." Larry would scoff whenever I raised my concerns. "Kara's my friend, too. There's nothing going on." Friend. The word left a bitter taste in my mouth. How could he be so blasé about the woman who had helped him demolish our marriage, our family? How could he not see the blatant disrespect in their constant togetherness? But Larry was blind to it all. Or perhaps he simply didn't care. Either way, his dismissive attitude only fueled the fire burning within me. One night, as I sat alone in the living room, stewing in my anger, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Kara standing on my doorstep, a sickeningly sweet smile plastered across her face. "Hey, bestie," she cooed, as if nothing had changed between us. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by." I couldn't believe her audacity. This woman, who had betrayed me in the most fundamental way, had the nerve to show up at my doorstep, acting as if we were still the closest of friends. "Don't you dare call me that," I spat, my voice dripping with venom. "You're no friend of mine, not after what you did." Kara's smile faltered, but only for a moment. "June, come on. We've been friends forever. Surely you're not going to let a little thing like this come between us?" A little thing? I could feel my blood boiling at her callous disregard for the pain she had caused. "Get out," I growled, my fists clenched at my sides. "And don't ever show your face around me again, you lying, deceitful snake." With that, I slammed the door in her face, leaving her stunned on the other side. As I leaned against the closed door, tears of rage streaming down my cheeks, I made a silent vow to myself. I would not let them win. No matter what it took, I would have my revenge. As if the betrayal of my husband and supposed best friend wasn't enough, the universe decided to pile on even more misery. Larry's mother, Evelyn, had been struggling with dementia for years, and it had finally reached a point where she could no longer live on her own. Guess who got saddled with the responsibility of being her full-time caregiver? Yep, that's right. Me. Larry, in all his infinite wisdom, decided that I was the perfect person to take on this burden, despite the fact that our marriage was crumbling around us. And of course, when I protested, he played the guilt card like a master manipulator. "June, you know how much my mom means to me," he pleaded. Those puppy dog eyes that used to melt my heart now only filling me with disgust. "I can't bear the thought of putting her in a home. Please do this for me." Do it for him? After everything he'd done, he had the audacity to ask me for favors? But I knew better than to argue. Larry had a way of twisting words and emotions, using my own fears and insecurities against me. So, like a fool, I agreed. And that's how I found myself spending my days caring for a woman who had never truly accepted me. Evelyn had always been critical of me, making snide remarks about my cooking, my cleaning, my very existence in her son's life. But now, in her more lucid moments, she would reach for my hand, her eyes pleading with me for help, for comfort. It was a twisted game of push and pull, one that left me emotionally and physically drained. One minute she would be cursing my name, calling me a useless burden on her family. The next, she would be begging me to stay, to not leave her alone. Through it all, Larry remained absent, both physically and emotionally. His visits were few and far between, and when he did show up, he was distracted, his mind clearly elsewhere. No doubt he was off gallivanting with Kara, living the life he had always dreamed of, while I was stuck in this living nightmare. The weight of it all was suffocating. I found myself longing for the days when my biggest worry was whether or not Larry would remember to pick up milk on his way home from work. Now, my days were filled with cleaning up messes, administering medication, and trying to reason with a woman who was slowly losing her grip on reality. And yet, despite the challenges, despite the constant barrage of insults and ingratitude, there was a part of me that couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of loyalty to Evelyn. After all, she was the mother of the man I had once loved more than anything in this world. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, that loyalty began to wear thin. Larry's manipulation, his utter disregard for my well-being, had pushed me to the brink of my own sanity. And slowly, a burning desire for revenge began to take root within me. If he thought he could just discard me like a piece of trash, leaving me to care for his ailing mother while he cavorted with his mistress, he had another thing coming. I may have agreed to play the dutiful wife for now, but mark my words, I would have my vengeance, and it would be sweet. The straw that finally broke the camel's back came in the form of a private investigator's report. After months of suspicion and gut-wrenching uncertainty, I finally had the truth laid bare before me. Larry and Kara's sordid affair, complete with dates, times, and locations of their trysts. As I pored over the damning evidence, a strange sense of calm washed over me. There was no more room for doubt, no more excuses to cling to. The betrayal was real, and it cut deeper than any knife ever could. But amidst the pain, a newfound resolve began to take root. I was done being the victim, the dutiful wife who turned a blind eye to her husband's indiscretions. It was time to take action, to reclaim my life and my dignity. First, though, I had to deal with the ever-present thorn in my side. My mother. Bless her heart, she meant well, but her outdated beliefs and unwavering loyalty to the patriarchy were suffocating me. "June, honey, you have to think about this," she pleaded, her voice laced with concern. "A divorce would ruin your family, ruin Larry's life. You need to stand by your man, for better or worse." Stand by my man? The audacity of such a statement made my blood boil. Had she not seen the evidence, the cold, hard proof of his betrayal? "Mom, with all due respect, Larry made his choices," I replied, my voice steady and unwavering. "He chose to cheat, to lie, to disrespect our marriage vows. I won't be made a fool of any longer." My mother's eyes widened, taken aback by my newfound assertiveness. But before she could protest further, I held up a hand to silence her. "This is my decision, and it's final. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." With that, I turned on my heel and left her sputtering in the living room. No more excuses, no more justifications. It was time to take control of my life. Over the next few weeks, I worked tirelessly, laying the groundwork for my revenge. I consulted with lawyers, gathered evidence, and made contingency plans. All the while, I played the part of the dutiful wife, lulling Larry into a false sense of security. And then, when the time was right, I struck. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon when I called Larry into the living room, a stack of papers clutched in my hand. He ambled in, unsuspecting, that dopey grin on his face that used to make my heart flutter. "What's up, honey?" he asked, plopping down on the couch. Without a word, I tossed the stack of papers onto his lap. Divorce papers, already filled out and signed by me. Larry's eyes widened in shock as he flipped through the pages, realization dawning on his face. "June, what is this? You can't be serious." "Oh, but I am," I replied, my voice cold and steady. "You brought this on yourself, Larry. Now it's time to face the consequences." As he scrambled to his feet, pleading and begging for another chance, I simply turned my back and walked away. No more words needed to be said. The die had been cast, and there was no turning back. Revenge, it seemed, would be mine after all. The day of reckoning had finally arrived. As I stood in the living room, facing Larry and Kara, it was like a scene straight out of a twisted drama. The two of them, huddled together on the couch, their faces etched with a mixture of guilt and defiance. "June, please," Larry began, his voice trembling. "Let's talk about this. We can work things out." "Work things out?" A bitter laugh escaped my lips as I shook my head in disbelief. "Work things out? You really have some nerve, Larry." I turned my gaze towards Kara, who couldn't even meet my eyes. "And you, my supposed best friend, How could you do this to me? Kara mumbled something under her breath, but I held up a hand to silence her. Save it. I don't want to hear any more of your lies. Larry rose to his feet, desperation written all over his face. June, think about this. A divorce would ruin me. My career, my reputation, everything would be destroyed. For a moment, a flicker of doubt crossed my mind. Was I really ready to upend our lives like this? But then I remembered the pain, the betrayal, the countless nights spent crying myself to sleep, and that doubt evaporated like smoke. That's not my problem anymore, Larry, I said, my voice steely with resolve. You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences. Kara finally found her voice, her eyes brimming with tears. June, please. We never meant to hurt you. It just happened. It just happened? I repeated incredulously. You betrayed me in the worst possible way, and you have the audacity to make excuses? I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, a white-hot rage that had been simmering for months. You know what, Kara? You're not my friend anymore. Why, in fact, you're nothing to me. Both of you can go to hell. The words hung in the air like a heavy weight, suffocating us all with their finality. Larry opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off before he could start. Don't even try it, Larry. This is over. Done. Finished. I want you out of this house by the end of the day. Kara let out a sob, burying her face in her hands. Larry, on the other hand, simply stared at me in stunned silence, as if he couldn't quite believe what was happening. June, please, he tried again, desperation seeping into his voice. I'll do anything. Just don't do this. But I was done listening, done making excuses for his behavior. With a shake of my head, I turned and walked away, leaving them to their misery. As I climbed the stairs, each step felt lighter, as if a massive weight was being lifted from my shoulders. The lies, the deceit, the constant sense of betrayal, it was all finally behind me. In that moment, I knew that no matter what came next, I would be okay. I had survived the unthinkable, and I had emerged stronger, more resilient than ever before. Larry and Kara may have thought they had won, but in the end, it was me who had reclaimed my power, my dignity, and my life. And as I closed the bedroom door behind me, I couldn't help but smile. Revenge, it seemed, was truly a dish best served cold. The next few hours were a blur of activity, punctuated by the sounds of shouting and slamming doors. True to my word, I was kicking Larry out of our home, and he was not going quietly. June, please, let's talk about this, he pleaded, his voice a mixture of desperation and anger. You can't just throw me out on the street. I steeled myself against his protests, focusing instead on the task at hand. With a strength I didn't know I possessed, I began gathering his belongings, clothes, books, personal effects, and tossing them haphazardly into boxes and bags. June, stop this madness, he shouted, grabbing my arm in a futile attempt to halt my progress. Think about what you're doing. I twisted out of his grasp, my eyes blazing with a fury I had never felt before. Don't you dare touch me, Larry. You lost that right a long time ago. Kara, bless her soul, had wisely chosen to remove herself from the situation, retreating to who knows where, but even her absence couldn't dampen the raging fire within me. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. The chance to excise the cancer that had been slowly poisoning my life. With each item I packed, each memory I boxed away, I felt a sense of liberation wash over me. This was my home, my sanctuary, and I would be damned if I let Larry's betrayal taint it any longer. June, please, I'm begging you, he tried again, his voice cracking with emotion. I can make things right, I swear. Just give me another chance. Another chance? The absurdity of his request nearly made me laugh out loud. How many chances had I given him already, only to have them thrown back in my face? You had your chance, Larry, I said, my voice cold and unwavering, and you blew it. Now it's time to face the consequences. As if on cue, the doorbell rang, and I felt a surge of relief wash over me. Angela, my best friend and confidant, had arrived, not a moment too soon. I opened the door to find her standing there, a look of steely determination on her face. Without a word, she brushed past me and made her way towards Larry, who was still pleading his case. You heard the lady, Angela said, her voice leaving no room for argument. It's time for you to go. Larry's eyes widened as he took in her imposing presence. For a moment I thought he might try to argue, but one look from Angela seemed to drain him of his fight. Fine, he spat, his voice dripping with bitterness. But this isn't over, June. Not by a long shot. With that, he gathered up the boxes and bags, shooting me one last venomous glare before storming out the door and slamming it behind him. As the echoes of his departure faded, I felt myself sag against the wall, the weight of the past few hours finally catching up to me. Angela was at my side in an instant, her arms wrapped around me in a comforting embrace. "It's okay," she murmured, her voice a soothing balm to my frayed nerves. "You did the right thing. He's gone, and you're free." And in that moment, as I clung to my friend, I knew she was right. The battle had been won, and the war was finally over. Larry was gone, banished from my life, and I could finally begin to heal. Revenge, it seemed, was a dish best served piping hot. The months that followed were a whirlwind of legal battles and emotional upheaval, but through it all, I remained steadfast in my resolve. Larry thought he could walk away scot-free, but he had another thing coming. With the help of a tenacious lawyer, I went after him for everything he had, alimony, assets, you name it. And in the end, my perseverance paid off. The judge saw right through Larry's lies and awarded me a hefty settlement, one that would ensure I could start my new life on solid financial footing. But the true victory, the sweetest revenge, came in the form of Kara's downfall. Karma, it seemed, had a wicked sense of humor. It all started when Kara's new boyfriend, some poor schmuck she had sunk her claws into, caught wind of her sordid affair with Larry. Needless to say, he was less than thrilled about being played for a fool. "You lying, deceitful snake!" he shouted, his voice carrying across the restaurant where they had been having a romantic dinner. "How could you do this to me?" Kara, for all her manipulative ways, was clearly caught off guard. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, unable to conjure up one of her trademark excuses. I can explain," she stammered, her eyes darting around the room in panic. But her boyfriend wasn't having any of it. With a shake of his head, he pushed away from the table and stormed out, leaving Kara to face the scrutiny of the other diners alone. As word of her betrayal spread through our social circles, Kara found herself increasingly ostracized. Friends who had once fawned over her suddenly wanted nothing to do with her. Even her own family seemed to turn their backs, ashamed of her actions. And through it all, I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of satisfaction. Payback, it seemed, was a dish best served ice cold. As for me, I was slowly but surely piecing my life back together. With Angela's unwavering support, I had moved into her spare bedroom, using it as a temporary home base while I figured out my next steps. It was during those long nights, huddled together on the couch with a bottle of wine and endless episodes of trashy reality TV, that the idea began to take shape. A business, one that would help other women like me, women who had been betrayed, belittled, and beaten down by the men in their lives. With Angela's encouragement, I took the leap, pouring my savings and settlement money into launching a boutique consulting firm. Our mission? To empower women, to help them find their strength and reclaim their lives after heartbreak and betrayal. It was a risky move, but one that paid off in spades. Word of our services spread like wildfire, and before long we had a thriving client base of women from all walks of life, each one seeking the same thing: revenge. And as I sat in my sunny office, surrounded by the hustle and bustle of a successful business, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. I had taken the ultimate revenge on Larry and Kara. I had built a life for myself, one that was infinitely better than anything they could have ever offered me. As for them, well, let's just say that karma has a way of evening the score. And in the end, it was me who emerged victorious, with a newfound strength and resilience that no one could ever take away. Revenge, it seemed, was a dish best served with a side of empowerment and a heaping helping of success. The sound of shattering glass jolted me awake. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, and reached for Jake. His side was empty, still made up from the night before. Right, he'd stayed at his parents' house to help with some renovations. I slipped out of bed, grabbed my robe, and crept towards the noise. "Jake?" I called out tentatively. "Is that you?" No answer. As I rounded the corner into our living room, I gasped. My mother-in-law, Martha, stood amid a sea of broken picture frames, family photos scattered across the hardwood floor. "Oh, Claire," she exclaimed, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm so sorry, dear. I was just trying to straighten these photos, and they all came tumbling down." I blinked, trying to process the scene. Martha, it's 6 a.m. How did you get in? She waved a key in the air. Jake gave me a spare, in case of emergencies. Of course he did. I bit back a sigh and forced a smile. Well, let me help you clean this up. As we gathered the broken glass, I noticed Martha scrutinizing each photo. She tsked at one of Jake and me on our honeymoon. Oh, Claire, you really should have worn a hat. The sun's so aging on the skin. I gritted my teeth. I'll keep that in mind for next time. The front door opened, and Jake walked in, looking surprised to see us. Mom, what are you doing here? Martha beamed. Just helping Claire tidy up, sweetheart. You know how disorganized she can be. I opened my mouth to protest, but Jake cut in. That's so thoughtful of you, Mom. Isn't that nice, Claire? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Jake's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and frowned. Oh, shoot. Dad needs help with the drywall. I've got to run back. But you just got here, I protested. I thought we were having breakfast together. He kissed my cheek absently. Rain check? Mom, you'll keep Claire company, right? Before I could object, they were both gone, leaving me alone with the mess and a growing sense of unease. Later that afternoon, I visited my parents. Dad was having one of his good days, alert and chatty as we sat in their sunny kitchen. How's married life treating you, Pumpkin? He asked, his eyes twinkling. I hesitated. It's an adjustment. Mom patted my hand. That's normal, dear. Your father and I had our rough patches, too. Dad chuckled. Remember when your mother thought I was having an affair with my secretary? Mom swatted his arm playfully. How was I supposed to know you were planning my surprise party? Their easy banter made my heart ache. Would Jake and I ever have that? My phone buzzed with a text from Jake's sister, Sarah. Family dinner at our place tonight. Don't be late. I showed it to my parents. Dad frowned. Bit short notice, isn't it? I shrugged. That's Sarah for you. Mom squeezed my hand. You go on, dear. We'll be fine here. As I drove to Jake's family home, my stomach churned with anxiety. These dinners always felt more like an inquisition than a family gathering. Martha answered the door, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Claire, darling, come in, come in. We were just talking about you. I stepped inside, the tension palpable. Jake, Sarah, and Thomas sat around the dining table, their conversation dying as I entered. Sarah's saccharine voice broke the silence. So, Claire, when are you and Jake planning on giving us some grandchildren? I froze, caught off guard. Jake looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Martha chimed in. You're not getting any younger, dear. Tick-tock! I felt my face flush as I struggled to find a response. This was going to be a long night, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was just the beginning of a much bigger storm. I stared at my reflection in the bridal boutique's mirror, my heart sinking. The wedding dress I'd dreamed of since childhood hung limply on the rack, replaced by a monstrosity of tulle and sequins that Martha and Sarah had insisted upon. Oh, Claire, you look absolutely divine, Martha cooed, clapping her hands together. Sarah circled me like a shark. It's perfect. Jake will be speechless. I caught my mother's eye in the mirror. Edith's face was a mask of concern, but she remained silent. We both knew this wasn't the dress I wanted. I'm not sure, I began, but Martha cut me off. Nonsense. This is the one. We'll take it, she announced to the saleswoman. My stomach churned. Wait, I haven't decided. Claire, Sarah interrupted, her voice sickly sweet. Don't you want Jake to be proud? This dress is a statement. It says you're part of our family now. I felt the walls closing in. Where was Jake? He'd promised to be here, to support me. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. A text from Jake. Sorry, can't make it. Trust Mom and Sarah's judgment. Love you. I blinked back tears. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. Later that evening, I confronted Jake at home. You said you'd be there. This is our wedding, Jake, not your mother's. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know, I'm sorry. Work's been crazy, but Mom and Sarah know what they're doing. They just want what's best for us. What's best for us? Or what's best for them? I countered. Jake's eyes hardened. Hey, that's not fair. They're family. And what am I? I shot back. The silence that followed was deafening. Days blurred together as wedding preparations spiraled out of control. Martha and Sarah steamrolled over every decision, from the venue to the menu. Jake remained frustratingly passive, always siding with his family. One afternoon, I escaped to my parents' house, seeking solace. I found Dad in his favorite armchair, looking more frail than I remembered. "What's wrong, Pumpkin?" he asked, patting the seat beside him. I collapsed next to him, the dam finally breaking. Through tears, I poured out everything, the dress, the plans, Jake's indifference. Dad listened, his face growing stormy. "This isn't right, Claire. A marriage is about two people, not an entire clan." Mom brought us tea, her worry evident. "Have you talked to Jake about how you feel?" I nodded miserably. "He just doesn't see it, or doesn't want to." Dad squeezed my hand. "Then maybe it's time to consider." A coughing fit interrupted him, violent and prolonged. Mom rushed to his side, fear etched on her face. "I'm fine," Dad wheezed, waving us off. But the pallor of his skin told a different story. That night, I returned home to find Jake, Martha, and Sarah huddled over seating charts in our living room. "There you are," Martha exclaimed. "We've decided to invite the Johnsons. I know you wanted a small wedding, but they're such good family friends." Something in me snapped. "No," I said firmly. The room fell silent. Jake looked up, startled. "What?" "I said no," I repeated, my voice stronger. "This is our wedding, Jake, ours, not your mother's, not Sarah's. And I'm done letting them run roughshod over everything I want." Martha gasped. Sarah's eyes narrowed dangerously. Jake stood, his face a mix of confusion and anger. "Claire, what's gotten into you? They're just trying to help." I met his gaze, a cold realization settling in my chest. "If you can't see what's happening here, Jake, then maybe we need to rethink this whole thing." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Martha and Sarah exchanged triumphant glances, thinking they'd won. But as I looked at Jake, seeing the conflict in his eyes, I knew this was far from over. Our wedding day loomed, and with it, a decision that would change everything. The morning of my wedding dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. I stood before the mirror, encased in the gaudy dress Martha and Sarah had chosen, feeling like a stranger in my own skin. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," Mom said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I forced a smile. "Thanks, Mom." A knock at the door made us both jump. It was Jake, looking handsome but troubled. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low. Mom squeezed my hand and slipped out, leaving us alone. Jake's eyes roamed over me, taking in the dress. "You look different." "This isn't me, Jake," I whispered. "None of this is." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know things haven't been easy, but it's just one day. We can get through this." I felt a flicker of hope. "So you understand?" "I understand that my family can be a bit much sometimes," he said carefully. "But they mean well. Let's just get through today, okay?" My heart sank. He still didn't get it. The ceremony was a blur of faces and voices. I said my vows on autopilot, barely registering Jake's words. As we walked back down the aisle, Martha's triumphant smile made my skin crawl. At the reception, I found myself cornered by Sarah near the cake table. "I hope you realize how lucky you are," she hissed, her smile never wavering. "Jake could have done so much better." I felt something snap inside me. "Is that so?" I replied, my voice dangerously calm. "Then maybe he should have." Before Sarah could respond, I grabbed a handful of cake and smashed it into her face. The room fell silent, all eyes on us. Jake appeared at my side, his face a mask of shock and anger. "Claire, what the hell?" I looked at him, then at the stunned faces of his family, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. Without a word, I turned and ran, ignoring the calls behind me. I found myself in the garden, gasping for air. Jake found me there, his tie askew and cake frosting on his sleeve. "What's going on with you?" he demanded. "You've embarrassed us all." "Us?" I echoed. "There is no us, Jake. There's you and your family, and then there's me, alone." His face softened. "That's not true. I love you." "Do you? Do you?" I challenged. "Because loving someone means standing up for them, supporting their choices. When was the last time you did that for me?" Jake's silence was deafening. "I can't do this anymore," I said quietly. "I won't live my life trying to please people who will never accept me." "What are you saying?" Jake's voice was barely a whisper. I slipped off my wedding ring and pressed it into his palm. "I'm saying goodbye." The shock on his face almost made me waver, but I steeled myself and walked away. As I reached the garden gate, I heard Martha's shrill voice. "Jake, what happened? Where is she going?" I didn't stay to hear his response. I kicked off my heels and ran, my ridiculous dress billowing behind me like a parachute of broken dreams. Hours later, I sat in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the remnants of a life I thought I'd left behind. Mom brought me tea, her face etched with concern. "What happens now?" she asked gently. I took a deep breath. "I don't know, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I can breathe." A commotion downstairs made us both start. Dad's voice, usually so weak lately, boomed through the house. "You have no right to be here. Get out!" Mom and I rushed downstairs to find Jake standing in our living room, looking lost and angry. Dad stood before him, trembling with fury. "Please," Jake pleaded, his eyes finding mine. "Claire, we need to talk." I stepped forward, placing myself between Jake and my father. "No, Jake, we don't. It's over." As I ushered him out, I caught a glimpse of a car idling at the curb. Martha sat in the driver's seat, her eyes boring into me with undisguised hatred. I closed the door, leaning against it as the weight of the day crashed over me. This was just the beginning, I realized. The real battle was yet to come. The shrill ring of my phone jolted me awake. I fumbled for it in the dark, my heart racing as I saw Mom's name on the screen. "Claire, it's your father." Mom's voice trembled. "He's had a stroke. We're at the hospital." I was out the door in minutes, my mind a whirlwind of fear and worry. As I sped through the empty streets, I realized I hadn't even told Jake where I was going. The hospital corridors seemed endless as I searched for Dad's room. I found Mom slumped in a chair outside, her face pale and drawn. "How is he?" I asked, breathless. She shook her head, tears welling up. "It's bad, Claire. The doctors, they're not sure he'll make it through the night." My world tilted on its axis. I steadied myself against the wall, trying to process the news. "Can I see him?" Mom nodded, squeezing my hand as I entered the room. Dad lay still, tubes and wires connecting him to beeping machines. He looked so small, so fragile. I took his hand, willing him to open his eyes. "I'm here, Dad," I whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." Days blurred together as we kept vigil by Dad's bedside. Jake called several times, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. How could I explain that my world was falling apart while he was busy planning Christmas with his family? On the 5th day, as I was dozing in the uncomfortable hospital chair, I felt a slight pressure on my hand. I opened my eyes to find Dad looking at me, his gaze weak but aware. "Pumpkin," he rasped. Tears streamed down my face as I called for the nurse. It wasn't a full recovery, but it was hope. As December crept closer, Dad's condition improved enough for him to come home. I threw myself into caring for him, grateful for every moment we had together. One evening, as I was helping Dad with his physical therapy exercises, Jake showed up unannounced. "Claire, we need to talk," he said, his face a mix of concern and frustration. "You've been ignoring my calls. Christmas is in 2 weeks, and we haven't even discussed our plans." I stared at him, incredulous. "Plans? Jake, my father almost died. He needs me here." Jake's expression hardened. "I understand that, but my family is expecting us. We can't just cancel Christmas." "I'm not canceling Christmas," I said, my voice rising. "I'm spending it with my parents. Here." "But what about my family?" Jake demanded. "They're your family too now." I felt something snap inside me. Are they? Because when my father was fighting for his life, where were they? Where were you? Jake flinched as if I'd slapped him. "That's not fair. I tried to be here, but work." "Save it," I interrupted. "I've made my decision. I'm staying here for Christmas. You're welcome to join us, but I won't be going to your parents' house." Jake's face clouded with anger. "You can't just make that decision without me. We're married, Claire. We're supposed to be a team." "Are we?" I challenged. "Because lately, it feels like you're on a different team altogether." We stared at each other, the gulf between us widening with every passing second. Finally, Jake turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Dad's voice, weak but determined, broke the silence. "You did the right thing, Pumpkin. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." I sank into the chair beside him, suddenly exhausted. "I know, Dad, but why does doing the right thing have to hurt so much?" He squeezed my hand. "Because it's worth it. You're worth it." As I sat there holding my father's hand, I realized I was at a crossroads. The life I had built with Jake was crumbling, but something new and uncertain was taking shape. Christmas loomed ahead, not as a celebration, but as a battle line drawn in the sand. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. Whatever happened, I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't back down. Not this time. The call came at 3 a.m., shattering the fragile peace I'd managed to find. Mom's voice, broken and raw, told me what I'd been dreading for weeks. Claire, he's gone. Your father, he's gone. The world tilted on its axis as I fumbled for my clothes, my mind a whirlwind of grief and disbelief. I didn't even think to wake Jake as I rushed out the door. The house was eerily quiet when I arrived. Mom sat in Dad's favorite armchair, clutching his sweater to her chest. I knelt beside her, words failing me as we clung to each other, our shared sorrow a tangible thing between us. As dawn broke, reality set in. There were calls to make, arrangements to handle. I moved through the tasks mechanically, each one a painful reminder of Dad's absence. It wasn't until late afternoon that I remembered to call Jake. His phone went straight to voicemail. I left a message, my voice hollow as I explained what had happened. Hours passed with no response. As evening fell, I tried again, only to be met with Martha's shrill voice. "Oh, Claire," she said, false sympathy dripping from every word. "Jake told us about your father. Such a shame. But you understand we can't change our plans for the charity gala tomorrow night, don't you? It's been in the works for months." I felt as if I'd been slapped. "Martha, my father just died. Surely Jake." "Jake knows his responsibilities," she interrupted. "I'm sure your mother can handle the details. Family obligations come first, after all." The line went dead before I could respond. I stood there, phone in hand, rage and disbelief warring within me. Mom found me like that, still frozen in shock. "Claire? What is it?" I told her about the call, watching as her face crumpled in pain and anger. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." The next day passed in a blur of funeral preparations and well-wishers. Jake remained conspicuously absent, his silence a deafening roar in the quiet moments. It wasn't until the evening of the wake that he finally showed up, looking uncomfortable in a suit that screamed charity gala rather than grieving family. "Claire," he started, reaching for me. "I'm so sorry. I wanted to be here sooner, but—" I stepped back, out of his reach. "But what, Jake? Your mother's gala was more important than being here for me? For my family?" He had the grace to look ashamed. "It's not like that. You know how important these events are. I couldn't just—" "Couldn't what?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "Couldn't be a husband, couldn't support your wife when she needed you most?" Jake's face hardened. "That's not fair. I'm here now, aren't I?" "Now?" I laughed bitterly. "Now is too late, Jake. Where were you when I was making funeral arrangements? When I was holding my mother as she cried herself to sleep? Where were you when I needed you?" A hush fell over the room as people turned to stare. Jake shifted uncomfortably, lowering his voice. "Claire, please, let's not do this here." "Why not?" I challenged. "Are you afraid people might see who you really are? A man who abandons his wife in her darkest hour for a party?" Jake's eyes flashed with anger. "That's enough. I won't stand here and be insulted. I'm leaving." As he turned to go, I felt something inside me break. "If you walk out that door," I said, my voice deadly calm, "don't bother coming back." He paused for a moment, conflict clear on his face. Then, without a word, he left. I stood there, surrounded by sympathetic murmurs and pitying glances, feeling more alone than ever. Mom appeared at my side, her hand warm in mine. "You did the right thing, sweetheart," she whispered. As I looked around the room at the faces of those who truly cared, who had shown up when it mattered most, I felt a strange sense of clarity wash over me. Dad was gone, and with him, the last threads of my marriage were unraveling. But in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty what I had to do next. It was time to reclaim my life, no matter the cost. The house felt empty as I returned from Dad's funeral, my grief a heavy blanket wrapped around my shoulders. Mom had decided to stay with her sister for a few days, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the echoing silence of our family home. I fumbled with my keys, pushing open the front door only to freeze at the sight before me. A thick manila envelope sat on the entryway table, Jake's neat handwriting stark against the brown paper. With trembling hands, I tore it open, my heart pounding as I scanned the contents. Jake wanted a divorce. The world tilted sideways as I stumbled to the couch, the papers clutched to my chest. How could he do this now, when the wound of losing Dad was still so raw? My phone buzzed incessantly, Jake's name flashing on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, unable to face his voice. Instead, I listened to the message he left, his words washing over me like ice water. "Claire, I'm sorry it had to be this way, but after everything that's happened, I think we both know this is for the best. My lawyer will be in touch about dividing our assets. Dividing our assets. The phrase echoed in my head, and suddenly a terrible realization dawned on me. Dad's inheritance. Jake's family had always been oddly interested in my parents' finances. Could this be why? Panic rising in my throat, I called my mother's lawyer, Robert. "I need your help," I said, my voice shaking. "I think Jake and his family might be after Dad's money." Robert's voice was calm, steadying. "Claire, breathe. We'll figure this out. Come to my office first thing tomorrow." The night passed in a blur of anxiety and sleeplessness. By dawn, I was at Robert's office, clutching a mug of coffee like a lifeline. "I've reviewed the documents," Robert said, his face grim. "It seems Jake is indeed trying to claim a portion of your father's estate as marital property. But don't worry, we can fight this." I nodded, a strange calm settling over me. "What do I need to do?" "First, we need to secure your assets. I'll file a temporary restraining order to prevent Jake from accessing any joint accounts. Then we'll prepare our counterpetition." As I left Robert's office, a plan forming in my mind, I spotted a familiar car parked across the street. Sarah, Jake's sister, sat behind the wheel, her eyes narrowing as she saw me. I marched over, anger fueling my steps. "Enjoying the show, Sarah? Did Jake send you to spy on me?" She smirked, not even bothering to deny it. "Oh, Claire, you should have known better than to think you could take on our family. Jake's told us everything about your father's money. We won't let you keep it all to yourself." Her words confirmed my worst fears, but instead of crushing me, they ignited a fire in my chest. "Watch me," I hissed, turning on my heel. Back at home, I began packing, throwing clothes and essentials into a suitcase. I couldn't stay here, not with Jake's family watching my every move. As I zipped up the bag, my phone rang. Mom's voice was frantic on the other end. "Claire, someone broke into the house. They've ransacked your father's study." My blood ran cold. "Mom, are you okay? Did you call the police?" "Yes, they're on their way." "But Claire, your father's safe. It's empty." "The safe? Where Dad kept all his important documents, including his will." My mind raced, connecting the dots. Jake's family wasn't just after the money. They were trying to erase any evidence of Dad's true wishes. In that moment, standing in the wreckage of my marriage, with my father's legacy under threat, I made a decision. I wouldn't just fight back. I would scorched earth this situation. Jake, Martha, Sarah, they had no idea what they'd unleashed. As I grabbed my keys, ready to race to my mother's side, a steely resolve settled in my bones. This was war, and I intended to win. The doorbell's shrill ring pierced the tense silence of Mom's living room. I exchanged a wary glance with her before approaching the door, my heart pounding. Through the peephole, I saw Martha and Sarah, their faces masks of false concern. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. "What do you want?" Martha's saccharine smile made my skin crawl. "Oh, Claire, darling, we've been so worried about you." I stood my ground, blocking their entry. "Save it. I know what you're really after." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "We just want to talk, Claire. Can't we come in?" "No," I said firmly. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it here." Martha's smile faltered. "Very well. Shustat, we've come to discuss your father's estate. Jake tells us there might be some complications." I felt a surge of anger. "Complications? You mean your attempt to steal what rightfully belongs to my mother and me?" Sarah stepped forward, her voice low and threatening. "Be careful, Claire. You don't want to make an enemy of us." "Too late," I spat. "Now get off my property before I call the police." As they retreated, Martha called over her shoulder, "This isn't over, dear. We'll see you in court." I slammed the door, my hands shaking. Mom appeared at my side, her face pale. "What are we going to do, Claire?" Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. It was Robert, my lawyer. "Claire, we've got a problem. Jake's family is contesting the will. They're claiming your father wasn't of sound mind when he made his last revision." My blood ran cold. "That's ridiculous. Dad was perfectly lucid until the end." "I know," Robert sighed, "but they've somehow gotten hold of medical records suggesting otherwise. We need to move fast." As I hung up, a terrible thought struck me. The break-in at Dad's study, they must have found something there. I turned to Mom, determination stealing my voice. "We're not going down without a fight. I need you to tell me everything you remember about Dad's last days. Every conversation, every decision." For hours, we pored over documents, piecing together a timeline. As night fell, a knock at the door made us both jump. To my shock, it was Thomas, Jake's father. He looked haggard, his eyes darting nervously. "Claire, I need to talk to you. It's important." Against my better judgment, I let him in. He collapsed into a chair. His shoulders slumped. "I can't do this anymore. Martha and Sarah, they've gone too far." Hope flared in my chest. "What do you mean?" Thomas took a shaky breath. "They forged those medical records. Your father was never evaluated for dementia. It's all a lie." My mind raced. This could change everything. "Thomas, would you be willing to testify to this?" He nodded, looking years older. "Yes, it's time I stood up to them." As Thomas left, promising to meet with my lawyer the next day, I felt a glimmer of hope, but it was short-lived. My phone rang, an unknown number flashing on the screen. "Hello?" Jake's voice, cold and unfamiliar, filled my ear. "I hope you're happy, Claire. You've turned my own father against us." "Jake, this has to stop. You know what your mother and sister are doing is wrong." He laughed, a harsh sound that sent chills down my spine. "Wrong? The only thing wrong here is you thinking you can win. We've got resources you can't imagine. By the time we're done, you'll be lucky if you have a penny to your name." The line went dead, leaving me shaken. I turned to find Mom watching me, her face a mix of fear and resolve. "What now?" she asked softly. I squared my shoulders, a plan already forming in my mind. "Now, we fight fire with fire. They want to play dirty? Fine, but they have no idea who they're dealing with." As I dialed Robert's number, ready to set our counterattack in motion, I realized this was more than just a battle over Dad's inheritance. It was a war for justice, for family, for everything I held dear, and I was ready to risk it all to win. The moving truck rumbled away, leaving Mom and me standing in front of our new home. A fresh start, miles away from the chaos Jake's family had brought into our lives. I took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. "Ready?" Mom asked, squeezing my hand. I nodded, a smile tugging at my lips. More than ready. As we unpacked, my phone buzzed incessantly. Jake, Martha, Sarah, all leaving increasingly frantic messages. I ignored them, focusing on creating our new sanctuary. It was past midnight when a crash downstairs jolted me awake. Mom's frightened voice called out, "Claire." Heart pounding, I grabbed the baseball bat I'd kept by my bed and crept downstairs. The sight that greeted me froze me in my tracks. Martha, Sarah, and Thomas stood in our living room, surrounded by shattered glass from the window they'd broken. Thomas looked terrified, but Martha's eyes gleamed with manic determination. "Where is it?" she hissed. "Where's Milton's will?" I raised the bat, my voice steady, despite my racing heart. "Get out of our house. Now." Sarah lunged forward, but I swung the bat, stopping inches from her face. She stumbled back, shock replacing her usual smirk. "Claire," Thomas pleaded, "this has gone too far. Let's just talk." "Shut up!" Martha snapped. She turned to me, her face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little bitch, after everything we've done for you." A siren wailed in the distance, growing louder. Mom appeared beside me, her phone in hand. "I've called the police," she announced, her voice stronger than I'd heard in months. Panic flashed across their faces. Thomas made a dash for the broken window, but tripped, crashing into a side table. Martha and Sarah hesitated, clearly torn between fleeing and continuing their search. The choice was made for them as red and blue lights flooded the room. "Police! Hands where we can see them!" As the officers burst in, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was it. The moment when all the lies, all the manipulation would finally come to light. Hours later, as dawn broke, I sat in our kitchen nursing a cup of coffee. The police had taken Martha, Sarah, and Thomas away in handcuffs, charged with breaking and entering, attempted theft, and a host of other crimes. Jake had shown up shortly after, wild-eyed and frantic, but instead of defending his family, he'd crumbled under questioning, admitting to his part in the scheme to steal Dad's inheritance. "Claire?" Mom's soft voice pulled me from my thoughts. "The detective wants to speak with us again." I nodded, standing up. "Let's finish this." In the living room, Detective Harris smiled warmly. "Mrs. Edith, Miss Claire, I have good news. With Thomas's confession and the evidence we found at the scene, we have more than enough to ensure Martha, Sarah, and Jake face justice." Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with sadness. What happens now? "They'll be prosecuted to the full extent of the law," he assured us. "And as for you two, you're free to live your lives without fear of further harassment." As the detective left, Mom and I stood in silence, the weight of everything that had happened settling around us. "I'm so proud of you, Claire," Mom said, her eyes glistening. "Your father would be too." I felt tears welling up. "I just wish he was here to see it." She pulled me into a hug. "He is, sweetheart. In every brave decision you've made, in every moment you've stood up for what's right, he's here." As we held each other, I realized that this wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning. We'd face the storm and come out stronger, our bond unbreakable. Later, as I stood on our new porch watching the sun set on this chapter of our lives, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face it. No more sacrificing my happiness for others. No more letting anyone dictate my worth. I was Claire, daughter, fighter, survivor. And this was my story, on my terms. As I turned to go inside to the warmth of the home we'd created, I smiled. The future was bright, and for the first time in a long time, I couldn't wait to see what it held. I slumped against the wall, my heart pounding as Dad's words echoed through the living room. "Rachel, in this world, a woman's power is in her silence." Grandma Edith shot him a furious glare. "Silence is not power, it's submission. You're suffocating her spirit." Dad's face reddened, and he turned his wrath on me. "Go to your room, we'll discuss your disrespect later." I hurried out, tears stinging my eyes. Another misstep, another punishment looming. Grandma was right, my life felt like a prison, my voice constantly muzzled. Later that night, I heard shouting from downstairs. Grandma's voice rose defiantly above Dad's angry bellows. "You can't keep treating her like this. She's not a possession to control." There was a loud crash, and my blood froze. I crept down the stairs to find Grandma clutching her cheek, a shattered vase at her feet. "Get out," Dad snarled. "You're a bad influence." Grandma looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Come with me, Rachel, please." I didn't hesitate. Grabbing her hand, we fled into the night. Grandma's little house was cluttered but cozy, filled with life and laughter. She encouraged my love for art, something Dad had forbidden as frivolous. With her, I could breathe freely. A few years later at a local art fair, I met Marcus. Charming and supportive, he seemed like the perfect antidote to my oppressive past. "Your work is incredible," he said, admiring my vibrant paintings. "You have such talent." I blushed, captivated by his warm smile and genuine interest. Grandma approved, thrilled to see me happy. We married quickly, and at first everything was blissful. But gradually, Marcus's subtle criticisms began. "Don't you think you're spending too much time on your art?" he'd ask, frowning at my paint-stained hands. "The house needs more attention." I brushed it off, not wanting to see the warning signs. Grandma's concerns, however, grew harder to ignore. "Be careful, Rachel," she cautioned. "His words may seem harmless, but they're trying to control you." I assured her it was fine, that Marcus simply wanted what was best for our future. But deep down, unease stirred, a sense that the silence I'd fought so hard to escape was closing in once more. The morning after our frantic escape, Grandma looked at me with sad eyes. "I'm so sorry, Rachel. I should have gotten you out of there sooner." I squeezed her hand. "You saved me. That's what matters," she smiled wanly. "Your father, I always hoped he'd change, but some people are too set in their ways." An uncomfortable silence fell until she brightened. "But now you're free. Free to live, to create, to become who you were truly meant to be." Under Grandma's guidance, I blossomed. Her chaotic little house became my sanctuary, a world away from Dad's harsh rules. I spent hours painting, pouring my pent-up emotions onto the canvas. At 18, I entered my first art show selling 3 pieces. The thrill of that accomplishment, the joy of strangers connecting with my work, nothing compared. Grandma beamed with pride. A few years later, at another local fair, a deep voice startled me. "Excuse me, miss? Your paintings? They're breathtaking." I turned to see a tall, well-dressed man smiling warmly. Something about his gaze made me feel truly seen. "I'm Marcus," he said, offering his hand. "And you are? Rachel?" I couldn't help but blush at his intense focus. Over the next few months, Marcus became a constant presence, always supportive, always in awe of my talents. With Grandma's blessing, we began dating, and I found myself falling for this caring, enlightened man. We married quickly, caught up in a whirlwind of romance. Marcus embraced my art, encouraging me to turn our small apartment into a studio. "Your creativity deserves to be nurtured," he'd insist. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, his tune began to shift. "Don't you think you're spending too much time cooped up in here?" he'd remark, eyeing my paint-splattered clothes with distaste. "The apartment's a mess." I tried not to read into it, chalking it up to his desire for order, but the comments grew more pointed. "We can't live like starving artists forever," he chided one evening, flicking at a stray brushstroke on the wall. "Your hobby is distracting you from more important things." My chest tightened, Gran's warnings echoing in my mind, but I pushed them aside, clinging to the belief that Marcus only wanted the best for us. Then, like a dark cloud blocking the sun, Cheryl arrived. Marcus's mother swept in without warning, her cold eyes immediately finding fault as she surveyed our living space. "Really, Rachel," she clucked, lip curling at my latest abstract piece. "You've let things get quite out of hand here." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Mother's just trying to help, dear. We could use a woman's touch around here." And just like that, the walls began closing in once more. With Cheryl's arrival, a palpable shift occurred in our home. Her critical gaze seemed to find fault with everything I did. "Honestly, Rachel, how can you let the dishes pile up like that?" She tsked, already rolling up her sleeves to take over. "No wonder Marcus is dissatisfied." Marcus would shrug apologetically. "She's just trying to help, dear. Let her." I bit my tongue, reminding myself that mothers-in-law could be difficult, but Cheryl's help quickly became a stranglehold. New stringent rules governed the household. My art supplies were relegated to a tiny alcove, paints and brushes scrutinized as unseemly clutter. Cheryl made no secret of her disdain for my hobbies. "A woman's purpose is maintaining her home," she declared one evening over a dinner I'd burned while distracted painting. "All this," she waved a hand at my rejected canvases, "it's just selfish indulgence." Marcus stayed silent, avoiding my hurt gaze. I wanted to protest, to remind him how he'd once delighted in my passion. But the words withered in my throat. Cheryl's control seeped into every aspect of our lives. She criticized my makeup, my clothes, the way I swept the floors. Nothing was ever good enough. "You're too soft on her," I overheard her berate Marcus one night. "You need to take the reins, son." The next morning, Marcus's eyes were cold as he handed me a list of chores and budget mandates. "We're going to start doing things properly from now on," he stated flatly. "My mother knows best." I stared at the draconian edicts, a knot forming in my throat. This was exactly the kind of oppression I'd fled from my parents' home. But I was a wife now. Wives obeyed their husbands, kept their households in order. That's what Cheryl and society demanded. So I fell silent and nodded. In the coming weeks, my life contracted around me. Art supplies were banned, deemed wasteful. Cheryl monitored our finances with an iron fist, doling out a paltry allowance for necessities. "We can't have you frivolously spending on those silly painter's materials," she sniffed. I mourned my creations, my vibrant colors slowly graying like my mood. Surreptitiously, I began sketching in hidden corners, hoarding pilfered pencil stubs and charcoal like treasured gems. It wasn't much, but it kept me sane amid the increasingly oppressive household rules. Make the beds precisely at 6 a.m., dust on Mondays and Thursdays only, dinner on the table promptly at 6:30 p.m. Failure to comply brought Cheryl's withering scorn and Marcus's cold disappointment. I walked on eggshells, each day a battle to hold my tongue against their constant belittling. "You're fortunate we put up with your nonsense," Cheryl snapped after I missed a spot whilst cleaning. I clenched my fists, desperately biting back the litany of retorts I longed to hurl. But one cutting remark slipped through. "Yes, I'm so lucky to have such control over my life." The slap cracked like a gunshot. I reeled, tasting blood as Cheryl's ring split my lip. Marcus watched impassively as she grabbed my hair, yanking me close. "Don't ever forget your place again," she hissed, eyes glittering with cruel satisfaction. "You'll do as you're told, or I'll make your life a living hell." I shrank back, cradling my stinging face as she stormed off. Marcus simply turned and followed, leaving me alone to lick my wounds. Curling on the bed that night, I traced the throbbing cut on my lip and finally let the tears flow. How could I have been so blind, so naive as to think I'd found an ally in Marcus? He was just another link in the chain, another cruel jailer suffocating my spirit. But a spark within me refused to be extinguished. I was stronger than their harsh words, stronger than their rules. I would find a way to breathe freely again. Grandma's voice echoed in my mind. "Never forget who you are, Rachel. Your fire cannot be snuffed out so easily. And with that defiant flicker burning bright, I began plotting my escape. With my escape plans simmering, I attempted to keep a low profile around Cheryl and Marcus, but their disdainful glares made that impossible. "What's this?" Cheryl sneered one morning, holding up a pencil sketch I'd carelessly left out. She crushed it in her fist. "Haven't you learned your lesson about these childish pastimes?" I stared at the crumpled paper, something inside me cracking. Before I could stop myself, the words burst out. "It's not a pastime. It's my passion." Her eyes narrowed to slits. "Your passion?" She barked a laugh. "Don't be ridiculous. A woman's passion is her family, or haven't I made that clear?" Seething, I opened my mouth, but Marcus cut me off. "That's enough, Rachel. Don't disrespect my mother." I gaped at him, stunned by his callous disregard for my feelings. The man I'd married, the one who once kindled my creative flame, was gone. This Marcus was cold, indifferent, a pale echo of his former self. Cheryl smirked victoriously. "From now on, I'll be handling all finances. Can't have you wasting money on silly hobbies." She plucked my debit card off the counter. "This is for your own good, dear." Impotent rage coursed through me, but I bit back my protests. Confrontation was useless against their united front. Over the following weeks, Cheryl's iron grip tightened until I felt smothered. She monitored every penny, allowing only meager funds for basic necessities. My art supplies, what little remained, were disposed of as wasteful clutter. "A wife's role is maintaining her household," she proclaimed loftily, "not indulging in silly distractions." I wanted to scream, to rage against her antiquated, oppressive beliefs, but one look from Marcus's disapproving eyes and the fire in my chest sputtered out. I was trapped. A bird in a gilded cage. My only solace came from secret messages with Lisa, my childhood friend. Late at night, I'd risk texting her about my suffocating home life, finding comfort in her outraged support. "You have to get out of there," she wrote one evening. "This is textbook abuse, Rachel." I traced the words, feeling both validated and afraid. Could she be right? Was this really abuse? The thought made my head spin. Marcus and Cheryl were difficult, controlling even, but abusive? Surely not. I was overreacting. Pushing aside my doubts, I kept venting to Lisa, finding strength in her empathy and care. Until one fateful night shattered that lifeline. "Who are you messaging?" Cheryl's voice sliced through the darkness like a whip. I startled, nearly dropping my phone as she loomed over me, eyes glinting with suspicion. "No one," I stammered. "Just an old friend." She snatched the device from my hands. "You know the rules about frivolous distractions. No exceptions." "Please, it's just... Did you hear me?" She raised her voice, cheeks mottling. "I said no exceptions." Marcus appeared in the doorway, frowning. "What's going on? Your wife was disobeying me. Again." Cheryl's tone dripped with disdain. "Wasting time texting friends instead of focusing on her duties." He crossed his arms, fixing me with that disapproving glower that made me shrink inside. "We've talked about this, Rachel. My mother's rules are for our own good." I opened my mouth, desperate to explain, to defend myself. But Cheryl silenced me with a contemptuous look. "Clearly you can't be trusted to follow simple instructions." She pried open a drawer and dropped my phone inside, along with my laptop. "No more distractions until you've learned your place." The finality of the slam made me flinch. Just like that, my last link to the outside world severed. I was alone, truly utterly alone with my tormentors. Without my phone and laptop, the walls closed in tighter than ever. My only connection to the outside world had been Lisa's understanding texts. Now, even that lifeline was severed. Cheryl's iron fist ruled every aspect of our lives. Schedules, chores, budgets, all dictated her draconian policies. One errant step, one perceived infraction, brought her wrath crashing down. "You missed a spot," she'd hiss after inspecting my cleaning. Again. "Are you intentionally trying to disrespect me?" I'd shake my head mutely, swallowing my protests as she berated me like a child. Marcus stood stone-faced during these tantrums, neither defending nor condemning me, just cold, silent indifference. Occasionally I caught him staring at me with an unreadable expression. A glimmer of the man I'd married flickered in his eyes as if struggling to surface, but it never did. One cowed look from Cheryl and that spark instantly extinguished. "Why are you looking at her like that?" she'd demand, voice dripping venom. "The girl needs discipline, not pity." I wanted to grab him, shake him out of this toxic haze clouding his mind. Didn't he see how she controlled him too? But I knew speaking out would only provoke Cheryl's fury. So I remained silent and compliant, hoping to eventually wear her down. That strategy proved futile one evening after she caught me staring wistfully at an old canvas, reminiscing over the vibrant life I'd breathed into it. "Still pining over that silly hobby?" she sneered, plucking the artwork off its easel. "You need to let this go, Rachel. It's unhealthy." "Please." I reached for it, desperately. "That means everything to me." She clutched it against her chest, lips twisting into a cruel smile. "Oh, I know, which is why I'm doing you a favor." With a savage wrench, she tore the canvas from its frame, ripping it to shreds before my horrified eyes. I could only watch, paralyzed, as she methodically shredded the colors, the life, the peace I'd found in creating. When the last scrap fluttered to the floor, she tossed the mangled frame at my feet. "There. Your meaningless distraction is gone for good." Something inside me finally snapped. I rounded on Marcus, who had entered during Cheryl's fit of destruction. "Are you really going to let her do this?" I cried, anguished tears burning my eyes. "She's destroying me piece by piece. When will it be enough?" He blinked, seemingly jolted by my rare outburst. For a fleeting moment, remorse flickered across his features. But Cheryl was quicker. "Don't be fooled by her hysterics," she snarled, grabbing his arm in a vice grip. "She's manipulating you, turning you against your own family." Marcus's face hardened, the shutters slamming down once more. "Don't raise your voice at my mother," he said, each word like a slap. "She knows what's best." I recoiled, feeling the weight of his callous dismissal like a physical blow. This man, this cold, subjugated stranger, he wasn't the person I fell for. Cheryl smirked in triumph. "Now get this mess cleaned up," she ordered, "and no more of your self-indulgent moping, understood?" Throat-burning, I could only nod. I gathered the tattered canvas remnants, cradling the ruined pieces to my aching chest. Once they'd been my salvation, a window into an inner world Cheryl couldn't touch. But now, like everything else, it lay in shreds at her feet, just another causality in her war against my spirit. Each day I could feel myself withering, smothered beneath the weight of her rules, her scorn, her absolute control. That night, I cried myself into an exhausted sleep, dreaming of Grandma's warm embrace, her fierce insistence that my voice mattered. "You have more strength than you know," she always vowed. "Never let them silence you, Rachel." But it was hard to believe that now. I felt so powerless, so hopelessly trapped in this waking nightmare. Except, in the darkest hours before dawn, I was struck by a reckless thought, a tiny spark of defiance that would not be extinguished. Slowly, ever so slowly, I began plotting a way to reach out to Lisa again. One tiny act of disobedience that could reopen the line to the outside world. It was dangerous, risking Cheryl's wrath. But I had to try, had to find a way to fan that spark into a flame that could guide me out of this darkness. I would not be silenced forever. Somehow, someway, I would find my voice again. My secret act of defiance began innocently enough, stashing pencil stubs and charcoal nubs I found around the house. Cheryl would never have allowed me art supplies, but she couldn't deny me every writing utensil. In the dead of night, I'd steal away to a neglected corner of the basement and scratch out tiny sketches on scraps of paper. Rudimentary still lifes, faces, anything to momentarily free my mind from its cage. It was risky. If Cheryl caught me, there'd be hell to pay. But I craved that fleeting escape into my own little world, the one place she couldn't control. Then one night, as I was carefully stowing my meager supplies, a tattered envelope caught my eye. It was tucked behind an old furnace grate, slightly singed but intact. My heart stuttered when I recognized Grandma's looping handwriting. With shaking hands, I tore it open and began reading, hungrily devouring every line of her reassuring prose. "My dearest Rachel," she wrote, "each day I think of you and pray you found even an ounce of the freedom and happiness you deserve." Tears stung my eyes as I consumed her empowering words, the ones I so desperately needed to hear. Grandma had always been my rock, my safe harbor against the storms of life. Reading her letters made me feel cradled in her embrace once more. I quickly found the rest of them, a small cache Cheryl must have confiscated and then forgotten in her zealousness to cut me off from any outside influence. Each envelope was like a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't alone, that I had an ally in my corner. You are stronger than you know, Grandma's looping script insisted. Never let that bitter shrew make you forget your fire. The letters reawakened a defiant spark I'd thought long extinguished under Cheryl's oppressive boot. My art, my voice, my very identity, she couldn't erase them, couldn't grind me down no matter how hard she tried. I began devouring the letters hungrily, daring to let myself dream of an escape, a future where I could breathe freely again. The sketches grew more elaborate, infused with newfound determination. But in my haste to savor Grandma's advice, I got careless. One night, as I was returning the letters to their hiding spot, a floorboard creaked behind me. I froze, dread churning my gut as a familiar sneer cut through the darkness. Well, isn't this just precious? Cheryl's bony hand snatched the letters from my grasp, lips curling in distaste as she rifled through them. So that's been your little secret. She fixed me with a glower that made my skin crawl. Reading this treacherous bile behind our backs. They're just letters, I whispered, anxiety clawing up my throat. From my grandma. They're all I have left of her. Exactly. Cheryl ripped them in half, letting the shredded pages flutter to the ground. And she's clearly been a negative influence, filling your head with delusions of defiance. She grabbed my sketch pad, methodically tearing out pages and shredding them one by one. Please, I heard the tremor in my own voice, hated how pathetic I sounded. Those mean everything to me. No. She punctuated each word by ripping another sketch asunder. They're a distraction, a crutch keeping you from embracing your proper role. I could only watch, numb with horror, as she demolished the last fragments of my identity, of everything that made me feel whole. When the final scraps drifted to the floor, she grabbed my chin with cruel fingers, forcing me to meet her cold stare. This defiance ends now, she hissed. No more letters, no more scribbling, no more of this pathetic crying. You will obey, or I'll make you regret the day you were born. Do you understand? I tried to pull away, but her nails dug into my skin like talons. Do you understand? She repeated, shoving her face towards mine. Flecks of spit struck my cheek as I shrank back, petrified. I could only manage a tiny nod. Cheryl released me with a contemptuous sneer. Good. See that you remember it. She stormed off, leaving me huddled amid the tattered remnants of my spirit. I gathered the shredded sketches, the torn letters, and cradled them against my heaving chest. Grandma's parting words, now slashed to ribbons, drifted through my mind. Never let them break you, Rachel. Never stop fighting. But as I wept over the ashes of my defiance, it was hard to see how I could ever keep that promise. After Cheryl's chilling outburst in the basement, an eerie calm descended over the house. She watched me like a hawk, looking for any hint of defiance to snuff out. I walked on eggshells, jumping at every creak, flinching from her piercing glares. Marcus, as usual, stayed silent and aloof. Whether he agreed with her tactics or simply lacked a spine, I couldn't tell. He just passively observed the slow erosion of my spirit. I knew placating Cheryl was useless in the long run. Her cruelty ran too deep, her need for domination too insatiable, but open rebellion would only provoke her wrath. So I bided my time, bottling my anger, my anguish, focusing it into a simmering determination. I would find a way to escape this nightmare. Somehow, some way, I'd break free. The opportunity came one night at dinner. Cheryl had been needling me all evening with snide remarks about my cooking, my cleaning, my inadequate performance as a housewife. Honestly, Rachel, she clucked, grimacing at the lumpy mashed potatoes I'd made. Is it too much to expect an edible meal? I grated my teeth, sorely tempted to dump the whole bowl over her head. But I remained stone-faced, silently fuming as she continued her blistering critique. No wonder Marcus is constantly disappointed. You're hopelessly incompetent. That barb struck a nerve. I opened my mouth, finally ready to unleash the torrent of anger I'd been holding back. But Marcus beat me to it. That's enough, he said, voice low but firm. There's no need to talk to her like that. We both froze, gaping at him in shock. Marcus had never once challenged his mother before, at least not in my presence. Cheryl recovered first, rearing back with an ugly scowl. Excuse me, are you actually defending this useless girl? I'm just saying there are ways to give constructive criticism without being cruel. He set his fork down, meeting her seething glare steadily. The constant belittling helps no one. An ugly silence stretched between them. I shrank in my chair, heartbeat thundering in my ears as Cheryl's complexion modeled. How dare you? She rose from the table, hands trembling with outrage. After everything I've sacrificed, you'd take her side against your own mother. Marcus faltered, shooting me an uncertain look, but a muscle twitched in his jaw, and he lifted his chin in defiance. Maybe it's time we had a serious discussion about boundaries. The resounding slap made me flinch. Cheryl's hand seemed to blur as it struck Marcus squarely across the face. "You ungrateful, spineless worm!" She loomed over him, eyes bulging with fury. "I gave up everything to raise you, and this is how you repay me?" Marcus cradled his reddening cheek, stunned into silence. An ugly chuckle ripped from Cheryl's throat. I knew letting that girl into our lives was a mistake. Her glare bored into me like a laser. She's poisoned your mind, turned you against your own flesh and blood. I opened my mouth, desperate to defend myself. But the look on Marcus's face stopped me cold, a strange mixture of fear, resignation, and bitter acceptance. "You're right, Mother," he mumbled, not meeting my stricken gaze. "I was out of line. It won't happen again." Just like that, the fight drained out of him. My heart plummeted, realizing this intermittent backbone had been an aberration, nothing more. Cheryl sneered in triumph. "See that it doesn't." She rounded on me with undisguised loathing. "As for you, you'd better start showing more respect around here. The only reason I tolerate your presence is out of love for my son." Her lip curled. "Though God knows what he sees in a sniveling, ungrateful wretch like you." The words lashed me like a whip. I flinched, blinking back shameful tears as she swept from the room, her scornful cackle echoing like mocking laughter. Marcus stared at his plate, shoulders slumped in defeat. I wanted to scream at him, to demand he grow a spine and stand up for me, for us. But his haunted expression stayed my tongue. In that moment I realized the bitter truth. Cheryl had him too tightly leashed. He would never defend me, never put my needs before hers. I was alone in this battle. But even that knowledge wasn't enough to extinguish the last stubborn flickers of hope, of defiance, burning in my chest. If Marcus lacked the strength to stand up for me, for our marriage, then I would have to find it within myself to stand up for us both. No more placating Cheryl, no more walking on eggshells around her venom. It was time to fight back. Consequences be damned. I was done being a passive victim. My escape may have hit a roadblock, but I would not be silenced or cowed any longer. The war was only just beginning. The distant rumble of thunder was my signal. I finished stuffing the last of my belongings into a duffel bag and crept downstairs, muscles tense in anticipation. Lisa was already waiting in her beat-up sedan, hazard lights blinking through the rain-streaked windshield. I risked one last glance back at the cold, imposing house that had become my prison. No more. I was done being a captive. Lisa threw open the passenger door, eyes wide with urgency. "Hurry, we don't have much time before they realize you're gone." I nodded grimly, tossing my bag in the back seat. "Just get me out of here." "I don't care where we go." The engine roared to life, and we peeled out of the driveway in a spray of gravel. I watched the looming house recede in the rearview mirror, its harsh angles and blank windows already fading like a nightmare slipping from my mind. My heart hammered the entire nerve-wracking drive, half expecting Cheryl or Marcus to suddenly give chase. But the night remained dark and blissfully silent, broken only by the thrum of the wipers and the drumming rain. By dawn, we were cutting across state lines into a sleepy coastal town, the salty air clearing the lingering ache from my lungs with each reviving breath. "We'll be safe here," Lisa assured me as we pulled into a dingy motel bearing a vacancy sign, at least for now. I could only mutely nod my thanks, feeling unmoored and disoriented. Just yesterday I'd been trapped in that gilded cage of a home. And now I was free, yet utterly adrift. The motel room was cramped but clean, its cheerful ocean-themed decor a jarring contrast to the tasteful but oppressive design of my marital home. So many memories lingered in those cold, sterile rooms. Here I could breathe again, really, truly breathe. Lisa squeezed my shoulder, eyes shining with a mixture of worry and pride. "You're out, Rach. You're finally out of that nightmare." The words hit me with a strange pang, my eyes stinging. I was out. I'd escaped. But at what cost? "I don't know what to do now," I confessed in a small voice. "Where do I even start to pick up the pieces?" "We'll figure it out," Lisa said firmly. "For now, just focus on healing, on rediscovering who you are. The rest will follow." Easy for her to say. That years of conditioning under Cheryl's tyrannical rule had stripped me of any sense of identity beyond meek, obedient housefrau. Who was I, really, if not the cowering, defeated creature she'd molded me into? Lisa must have sensed my doubts. "You're stronger than you think, Rach. That's why you got out." I wished I could share her conviction, but my mind kept spiraling back to Marcus and the shattered remnants of the life I thought we'd have. How could I ever trust myself, or anyone, again after being so thoroughly deceived? Over the next few days, I drifted through the unfamiliar town in a fog, half-heartedly job hunting, as Lisa insisted, but struggling to imagine any future for myself beyond mere survival. I was rudderless, unmoored, suffocating beneath the weight of all I'd endured. So consumed by my inner turmoil that I nearly walked straight into an elderly gentleman on the boardwalk. "Easy there, miss." The cheery voice broke through my stupor. "You look a million miles away." I blinked, refocusing on the kindly face and warm brown eyes crinkling with concern. For some reason, his affable manner immediately put me at ease. Sorry, I wasn't watching where I was going." I shifted the strap of my bag awkwardly. "Just got a lot on my mind lately." "Ain't that the truth?" he chuckled, squinting against the sun. "Say, you wouldn't happen to be looking for work, would you? My diner's in desperate need of an extra pair of hands." I opened my mouth to politely decline. What did I know about waitressing? But something made me pause. A flicker of possibility? Of purpose, however small? Or maybe I was just sick of drowning in my own misery. "You know what? I'd really appreciate any job right about now." The old man's face crinkled into a sunny smile. "Well, alrighty then. Name's Trevor, by the way. Let's get you started on a new chapter." Chapter. The word struck an odd chord deep within me, stirring faint embers of the creative spirit I'd thought long extinguished. A new chapter, free from the shackles of my past. I matched Trevor's smile, the weight on my chest feeling just a little bit lighter. "Sounds perfect. I'm Rachel, and I'm ready to start over."
You're useless. You can't even handle the chores or take care of the kids, let alone pay the AL money. Kyle finally showed up at the hospital 3 weeks after my car accident, saying these mean things without caring about me lying there in the hospital bed. At first, I hoped Kyle came because he cared about me, but I was disappointed. I sighed deeply. Honestly, I had already been thinking about getting a divorce. I didn't expect Kyle to bring it up now, but I guess it's a good thing. It saved us both some trouble. Fine, I agreed quickly, which surprised Kyle. He didn't know I was already ahead of him. I wanted to tell him I knew what he was planning and was secretly laughing at him in my head. My name is Sarah. I'm a 40-year-old housewife living with my husband Kyle and our 7-year-old daughter Lisa. Kyle and I met during a group blind date and got married when I was 30. He was easy to talk to, and eventually I fell for him, and we started dating. Kyle was charming, the most handsome man at the table when we first met. When he showed interest in me, I felt flattered and proud. Kyle was incredibly romantic in our early days. He would surprise me with desserts and flowers at fancy restaurants for my birthdays, take me on trips for our anniversaries, and write heartfelt letters at just the right moments. I felt so lucky to have him and eagerly accepted his marriage proposal, imagining a life full of surprises and excitement even after marriage. But once we were married, things changed. "Hey, Sarah, my dinner isn't ready yet." "I've been working all day, and you can't even have dinner prepared when I get back." "You're so lazy." After we got married, Kyle started acting like he was the boss of the house, and I was his servant. At first, I was shocked by how different he was. I thought he was just joking when we were dating. We used to laugh at each other's silly jokes. We imagined a sweet life where we'd call each other cute nicknames and stay lovey-dovey even after having kids. But he wasn't joking. He really treated me like a servant. At first, I laughed it off, thinking he was kidding. But then I realized he was serious. He actually saw me as his caretaker, and that scared me. After we got married, I had to quit my job and we depended on the money Kyle earned. I was afraid that if I didn't do what he said, he might cut me off financially, so I felt trapped. Honestly, Kyle's income wasn't great. I made more money when I was working. Kyle only finished school and kept changing jobs. He never stayed at a job for more than a year or two. It seemed like Kyle felt insecure about his background and took out his frustrations on me. "I'm sorry I got delayed with some errands," I told him once. "Don't make excuses. Just hurry up and make it," Kyle replied, sitting down with a cold beer. This became a common scene, but each time I sighed and started cooking. My marriage made me miserable, but I managed to get by. The following year, our daughter Lisa was born, and my days became even more difficult. As expected, Kyle didn't help much with Lisa. However, he would spoil her by buying her any candy or toy she wanted. I tried to raise Lisa properly, so I scolded her when needed, which made her cling to Kyle even more. "Lisa, you like Daddy, don't you?" Kyle asked her once. "Yeah, Daddy is cool." "I love Daddy," Lisa replied. "I knew it. I'm super dad," Kyle said, looking at me smugly. It was frustrating, but I couldn't help feeling glad that Lisa loved her father. I just sighed again. Despite spoiling her, Kyle never attended any of Lisa's kindergarten events like sports festivals or recitals. You know there's a parent CH race at Lisa's sports festival. Could you participate? I asked him. "Huh, why me?" "You're free that day. You do it," he responded. "But the sports festival could be a great time for us to bond as parents." "It's on a holiday, so you won't have to work," I said to Kyle. "Shut up. We're already close enough. Maybe you should work on your relationship with Lisa. She thinks you're mean, you know." "You might want to fix that," Kyle said, laughing as he left for work. He called himself a super dad, yet he never showed up to school events. I worried that Kyle's habit of being easy on himself, but hard on others, might influence Lisa. He continued to leave all the housework and childcare to me and was lazy at home. Now Lisa is 5 years old and ready to start elementary school. But Kyle was still jumping from job to job. He had just quit his factory job last month and moved to a food and beverage company. "I'll be working weekends at my new job since it's in the food industry," he said. "Looks like we'll hardly see each other then," I replied. "Can't be helped. It's work," he said. Honestly, I was relieved because I was tired of Kyle ordering me around on weekends. Now I wouldn't have to be nagged by him to clean the floor or serve meals quickly. But if Kyle was out on weekends, Lisa would be sad. It's better for kids to spend holidays with a whole family. "I have work, so please let Lisa know," Kyle said. I couldn't really argue with Kyle since he was the one bringing in the money. Reluctantly, I went to tell Lisa. "I'm sorry, but Daddy won't be able to go out with you on his day off," I said, frowning. Thinking she would be upset, however, contrary to my expectations, Lisa seemed unconcerned. "It's okay. If you're okay with it, then it's fine. You know he's not going to be here on all weekends, right? Daddy has been smelling strange lately," she said. "A strange smell?" I asked, puzzled. Lisa nodded and went back to her room. What on earth was she talking about? I've been so busy with housework and taking care of our child that I hadn't noticed much about Kyle lately. Our marriage was not like it used to be, and I tried to avoid being around Kyle to keep things calm. The strange smell Lisa mentioned might be from the factory, I thought. Factories often use special solvents, so it made sense that Kyle could come home with a weird smell. If that was the case, the smell would probably go away soon. Kids are really honest, which is what makes them so endearing. Despite what he said, Kyle started leaving the house early in the morning, even on his days off, which was odd. He also left every weekday. If he was working weekends, he should have a day off during the week. He left without saying anything to me, so I couldn't tell if he was going to work or not. I became curious about what he was doing, leaving so early, even on his days off. One day, I asked Kyle, "You seem to be going out every day. What are you doing?" Kyle looked confused for a moment, then answered in an annoyed tone while scratching his head. "I'm working. I go to work voluntarily, really. But you should take care of yourself or your body won't hold up," I replied. "Shut up. Don't complain about my job," I snapped back. I didn't understand why he got so angry when he often complained about my housework and child rearing. I didn't believe what Kyle said. There's no way he, who usually avoids trouble, would go to work voluntarily on his days off. I knew this from watching him closely over the years. If he was that passionate about work, he would have stayed at his previous job longer. I'd also started paying attention to the strange smell that Lisa mentioned. Indeed, Kyle came home with a sweet, strong fragrance. This strange smell was not from the factory. Why hadn't I noticed this before? I blamed myself for being so naive and vowed not to make the same mistake again. From then on, I decided to watch Kyle more carefully, especially on weekdays when he said he was going to work. He seemed to wake up an hour earlier than usual and took extra care grooming himself. He appeared to be in a good mood on those days, which varied from week to week, sometimes on a Monday, sometimes on a Thursday. But it was clear that Kyle was happy on those days when he left the house. I went into his room to look for any clues. I felt like a detective searching a house. Since I always clean Kyle's room, I knew it well and didn't feel bad about snooping around. If Kyle had hidden anything, it would be in a place not easily seen. I searched carefully under the desk and bed. Finally, hidden in a candy tin in the closet, I found a bunch of letters. What were these? All the letters were from the same person named Patricia. They had been sent through the mail, the oldest letter from 4 months ago and the newest from yesterday. As I read the letters, I saw phrases like, "I regretted when we broke up, but now I really love you and I want to go back to the time when I was with you." It sounded like something a lovesick teenager would say. At first, I thought maybe Kyle's ex-girlfriend was sending these letters on her own. But then I read a line that worried me. "I'm glad you like me again. I'm looking forward to our next date." This was from last week. It looked like Kyle was seeing Patricia today. He was definitely up to something. I took photos of the letters with my smartphone as evidence. I thought about taking the letters, but didn't want to make Kyle suspicious. Even with these letters, I felt I didn't have enough proof. After thinking it over, I decided to hire a private investigator to check on Kyle. 3 weeks later, the investigator gave me the results. He brought photos of Kyle and Patricia close together in the park at night, and even a recording of them saying, "I love you" to each other. I accepted the facts calmly, with solid proof in hand. I went to the municipal office and came back with a divorce form. Now that I knew Kyle was cheating, I had no reason to stay with him. I planned to confront him with the divorce papers the next time something happened. I returned home and let out a deep sigh. I was acting resolved, but honestly, I was heartbroken. I was upset with myself for having married someone as careless as Kyle. I was thinking about resting a bit before making dinner when my phone rang. "Hello. Yes, Sarah. Do you have time to talk?" I was surprised to get a call from my father. He usually doesn't call me. "Actually, your mother and I were talking yesterday, and we were thinking about transferring our assets to you soon." "Huh, what happened?" "My father ran a company that sold imported goods to Japanese corporations. I was the daughter of a big company president, but I never told Kyle about this. I thought it would make me sound boastful, especially since Kyle jumped from one job to another. We're getting old and thinking about retiring. We thought about keeping the company going, but didn't want to push it onto you, our only daughter. So we decided to step back. I see. I felt guilty about not taking over the company, but my parents respected my decision and had planned for the future. I was touched by the thoughtfulness. We're thinking of handing over our assets to you. Our total wealth is $17 million, but we're fine with just $3 million. We've decided to give you the remaining $15 million. $115 million. I was shocked. That was more money than I could ever imagine earning in my lifetime. Yes, there will probably be inheritance tax, but you'll still have plenty left. You won't have to worry about living expenses for the rest of your life, Dad said. Thank you. I expressed my deepest gratitude to my father and mother and hung up. Soon, $15 million would be coming my way. With that money, I wouldn't have any worries, even if I divorced Kyle. No offense to him, but he probably couldn't earn that much. I felt relieved and was in a daze for a while. I glanced at the clock. It was 6:00 p.m. I realized I needed to make dinner and check the fridge, but there were no groceries left. I got ready to go shopping at the supermarket. My heart was light, but I also felt a sense of urgency that Kyle might come home soon. As I was hurrying across the last crosswalk to the supermarket, the light turned green. Watch out! Someone yelled, but it was too late. My body was already in the air, and then I hit the ground hard. The sharp pain shot through my head, and without understanding what had happened, I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was lying on a hospital bed. The first thing I saw when I opened my eyes were my parents and Lisa. Sarah, thank goodness, Mom said. Lisa was crying next to me. I gently stroked her head. You were hit by a car and broke both legs. They say it will take 5 months to fully recover. 5 months. I felt busy thinking about being out of action for so long. From that day on, I was stuck in a wheelchair. Although the nurses took care of me, I felt frustrated and annoyed because I couldn't use my legs. During my stay in the hospital, my parents and friends visited me. My parents were taking care of Lisa now, since Kyle was always at work. I thought that was better for her. I was glad everyone visited, but Kyle never came. I started to doubt his care, thinking, aren't we husband and wife? However, 1 week after I was hospitalized, Kyle finally showed up. Hey, feeling good? Kyle asked sarcastically. Yes, man. It's a mess at home without me, I replied lightly. Kyle always complained about my housework. As soon as he spoke, showing no empathy, I sighed. I thought he would be at least a little worried about me. What can I do? I was in a car accident. I snapped back. Kyle looked at me with disdain and said, you're useless if you can't do housework or take care of the child. That's the worst, and you should pay alimony. He said such horrible things to his hospitalized wife. Initially, I had hoped Kyle came to visit out of concern, but he was still disappointed. I sighed deeply. Honestly, I had been thinking about getting a divorce myself. I hadn't expected Kyle to bring it up today, but it saved me the trouble of arguing. Sure, I said, and Kyle looked surprised when I agreed. Unfortunately, I know what you're up to. I wanted to say, laughing inside. Here's a divorce notice. I took out a filled-in divorce form from a bag my mother had bought and held it in front of Kyle's face. You already had this. Kyle was briefly confused, his eyes wide, but then he took the divorce notice from me and filled in his name and address right there. I felt relieved, knowing I wouldn't have to see Kyle's face ever again. I wanted to tell him the feeling was mutual, but I just watched him leave silently. Probably, Kyle would remarry Patricia after the divorce. I didn't know what kind of woman Patricia was, but it was sad to think she was going to marry someone as controlling and unpleasant as Kyle. I felt a bit guilty about Lisa, but deciding to leave was something I had thought about for a long time. I promised myself I would take good care of Lisa. A month after Kyle left, my life was peaceful. The time without my husband nagging me felt like heaven. I was released from the hospital and started physical therapy. I decided to stay at my parents' house until my legs healed fully. My parents were angry at Kyle when they learned about the divorce, but they stopped pressing the issue when I told them I wanted to forget about him. Lisa didn't seem lonely even without her father around and was happily going to elementary school. In the end, Lisa also noticed Kyle's domineering behavior and probably didn't see him as a father anymore. I was convinced that divorcing Kyle was the right decision. But one afternoon, I got a call on my mobile phone. I ignored it when I saw Kyle's name, but the phone kept ringing nonstop. Eventually, I answered the call. "Hey, Sarah, when are you coming back?" Kyle's words made no sense to me, and he sounded like he was about to start yelling. "What do you mean, coming back? You married Patricia, didn't you?" I replied. When I mentioned Patricia's name, Kyle sounded surprised and exclaimed, "How do you know that?" "Did you think I didn't know you cheated? That's why I asked for alimony." "Yes, that's right. But alimony and child support, I can't pay that." "Why do I have to pay alimony anyway? You, who never did the housework, should be the one to pay," Kyle argued. I was shocked to hear Kyle's argument. I had asked for alimony and child support through a lawyer, but he hadn't paid yet. I knew Kyle didn't have a lot of money, but he should find a way to pay. Yet here he was saying something ridiculous, like I should be the one to pay alimony. "I noticed your affair and gathered evidence." "Did you see it from the lawyer?" It seemed that Kyle had already seen the evidence from the detective agency. That would make things easier, but him calling me was ridiculous. "I wanted a divorce even before I found out about the affair because you never helped with housework or childcare, and you complained all the time. I'm not your housekeeper, you know, but it's good you're married now. You have someone else to look after you. But here's the thing, Patria can't do housework. Before we got married, she said, leave everything to me. But once we got married, her cooking was terrible and she didn't clean. I would have been better off with you. Marry me again. After all, you don't have any money, right?" Lisa liked me too, didn't she? Kyle said, which annoyed me. "What are you talking about? You divorced me and remarried. You're her partner, not my responsibility. And sorry to say, Lisa doesn't like you, and I have money." "Don't lie to me. There's no way you have money. You are a housewife. You can't live without me." I had no intention of telling Kyle about the fortune I inherited from my parents. But faced with his aggressive attitude, I had no choice but to reveal it. My parents are CEOs. Recently, I inherited their assets. It's around $52 million in total, so I can live without working for the rest of my life. I could almost visualize Kyle gaping on the other end of the phone as he heard about this fortune. "You're lying. There's no way you have such a huge amount of money." Kyle finally seemed to believe my words and fell silent. Then he suddenly yelled, "If it's true, why didn't you tell me?" "Well, I wanted to tell you, but I knew about your affair and I thought the worst of you. So I thought it didn't matter." At that point, I hadn't yet inherited the assets, and there was no issue of property distribution. Kyle bit his lip in frustration. He probably never imagined I had such assets. He must be regretting that he divorced me, but I didn't want to suffer his terrible behavior anymore. "Can I hang up now? Please pay the alimony properly, reflect on your actions, and never call me again. Goodbye." With that, I hung up the phone. I immediately blocked Kyle's number so he couldn't call anymore. "Mom, who were you talking to?" Lisa walked into the room and asked curiously. "Just a friend," I replied. "But Lisa, do you want to go to the amusement park this weekend?" "Yes," Lisa smiled happily. Seeing her smile reminded me that her happiness was all that mattered to me. A few days later, I heard that Kyle had broken up with his new wife, Patricia. They argued because she wouldn't do housework, and Patricia ended up leaving him. Kyle, having been divorced twice in a short time, would probably find it hard to get married again. I hoped he would stay single for a while to prevent more people from getting hurt. After the divorce, Kyle lost his motivation and quit his job at the restaurant. He would probably find another job, but it might take him some time to get his life back on track. I felt a bit sorry for him, but his problems were his own doing. I blocked his call so he couldn't ask me for money, and I avoided places where we used to go together. In my life, Kyle had virtually disappeared. Eventually, Kyle paid the alimony, but ended up in debt. I don't know how he'll manage, but I hope he learns from his mistakes. I'm still living comfortably at my parents' house. They told us we could stay as long as we like. After my legs fully healed, I started part-time work at a local flower shop. Even though I don't need to work, I find it better to be active and leave the house. I work hard on weekdays and spend weekends having fun with Lisa and my parents. I feel more joy in life than before and want to keep living happily with the people I love. I cherish these happy moments, especially when I see Lisa's smile.